Hello, good evening. We are meeting this evening with a very important Canadian writer and author and communicator and expert in something called NLP. I think most of you know what NLP is. If not, stay tuned to see what we are going to talk about. Topics like manipulation, better communication, and how words can influence our lives. I'm talking this evening with Shelle Rose Charvet. Hello, and thank you so much for having accepted our invitation for this new Litera literary festival.
Thank you, Nadine. Ce faci? Yeah.
Mulțumesc bine. Thank you so much. And I'm very happy to be talking about such an important topic, words, which is my life. I mean, it's always been like this. And the other part of words and about communication and about language is manipulation. And I think it's important to know how words can interfere with our lives, and we are not even aware of this thing. So I have to say, first of all, before we start our debate, that you are the author of a very important book, which is called Words That Change Minds, cuvinte care schimbă minți in Romanian. And it's important because not only has it been translated into 20 languages, and I have to say what you told me that, for instance, the French edition is double because it's published in Canadian, in the Canadian French, and it's published in the French in France. But also it was declared by Forbes, the Forbes magazine, as the best management book or management tool, I would say, for entrepreneurs and executives, which is quite scary because it means that we are getting manipulated very well by that. So this was meant to be a joke, but maybe it's not. And I urge all the people watching us to read your book to understand how they can better understand what they are getting manipulated and how to use words cautiously, especially in a work environment, because you never know what they produce in other people's minds. I have to start with a question which I think is on the mind of everybody reading your book. Are words capable of controlling minds, really? And if yes, how so? Is it that easy?
Yeah. You know, it's not that easy because most people have never learned how to use words to have the kind of impact that they want. You know, what most people do, and I want to talk about the problem first, and I want to talk about this aspect of controlling minds and also manipulation. You know, what most people do, and highly successful people do this even more, is they use the same strategies that they use to convince themselves about something to try and convince someone else. And they don't recognize that other people think differently, get motivated differently. And it's like you're standing at your bus stop, you're looking down the road and you're saying, why aren't you already here? You should be thinking like I think and doing what I do. So most people suck at influencing or persuading other people. Now, what I talk about in my book is how do you go to someone else's bus stop, their emotional bus stop, their psychological bus stop. And from their bus stop, how do you invite them to get on the bus? And here's the controlling thing. You can't force someone on your bus, but you can be more enticing and less off-putting, and so that people are more likely to want to get on your bus. And then you can bring them somewhere useful for both of you. Now, and that's where the question of control and manipulation comes. You know, when you think about words, when I ask a question or I say something, I direct your attention towards something or away from something. And I talk about these two patterns, towards and away from, in my book. So even just the words or the questions I choose, in a way, they control the other person because they direct your attention. And if I know you well enough and I know what's important to you, then I can use that in how I direct your attention, and you'll be more interested in what I have to say, for sure. So you can kind of control people.
But how do you do that on the long term? Because maybe if you don't know someone very well, you can do this once or twice. But for the long run, I think you need more. Concretely, how do you do that?
So one, your motivation is very important. Is my motivation simply to get what I want from you? If that's my case, then I'm going to do everything to manipulate you. And I believe that's an incredibly short-term strategy. As you said, if you want a long-term relationship, you have to look at your motivation. I want to have an impact. I want to have a positive influence on our relationship. So I need to behave in a way that is respectful. And I believe if I go to your bus stop and you know that I'm doing my absolute best to make sure I understand you, then you are more likely to want to understand me. But if you get the sense that I'm using technique number ABC to get you to do something, your trust is going to go down. And over the long term, the relationship will be broken. And I think a lot of people don't know the difference between influencing and manipulating. In Europe, for example, many people believe the word influence means manipulate. Whereas I think there's a difference. When you're influencing, you're acting out of everyone's best interest and you have persuasive communication. When I'm manipulating, I don't care what you want. I only care about what I want. And I hope that people are learning about manipulation and learning how it works and reading books on persuasion so that you cannot be a victim of that. So you can prevent it when people try to do that to you, because it's not great to be on the receiving end of this kind of behavior. And people need to know how to defend themselves.
You said something very important. You mentioned persuasion, which is kind of different from manipulation and different from influence. But let's not forget about the influencers. So they are the good ones and the manipulators are the bad ones. But we are being manipulated all the time, right? By everybody around us, by the society, by all the possible systems, by ourselves.
So Nadine, what do you mean when you say manipulation? Because I want to be sure that I am understanding what you mean.
The term that you used before. So in the influence, the negative influence for a purpose which serves somebody else.
Right. Okay.
But we are also manipulators. I suppose this is an endless chain of manipulators being manipulated and manipulating in their turn. And it's a loop and it's never ending. So my next question was, are there people who cannot be manipulated or influenced? I mean, for the bad or for the good? And if yes, why? Because I'm making the comparison with somebody who is not able to be hypnotized or to let herself be hypnotized. Is it something that is in our control if we pay attention, if we get educated, if we read your book, or if we study NLP? Are we going to become non-manipulatable? Manipulatable, sorry.
Oh, you know what? I wish it were that simple, but it's not that simple. There are people who are very skeptical. You have them in your life. I have them in my life. Everyone has skeptical people in their life. Sometimes it's us. And it's not a way of being necessarily. We have a skeptical mode. We also have what I call the macho pattern. And these are people who seem to be running a program that I'm perfect in every way. I'm better than everybody else. I never make mistakes. And it's harder to have an influence or an impact with these people. And this is one of the reasons I wrote my book. I actually have an article called The Macho Test that shows people how to take the message that you're doing and adjust it so that even the most macho person who already knows everything will, at the very least, think about your idea. So you maybe can't force them to adopt your idea. But what happens to people when they come against macho people is that nothing goes in, bang, bang, bang. Well, if you adjust how you talk, they'll at least take it in and think about it. Now, don't believe me. You have to try out the technique for yourself. And I can send you a copy of the Macho Test article that maybe you can put into Romanian and add, because that's a technique that's worthwhile learning, in my opinion. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to ask you something from the very beginning, just to have an example, a practical example. Could you use some NLP on me while we are doing this interview? And at the end, tell me what you did. And if I reacted properly, I mean, if I got manipulated or influenced by you. I promise that we didn't talk about this before.
So
and
Nadine, I will continue to do this then.
Thank you. I agree.
Because, okay, so the whole thing is, if my job is to go to your bus stop, I have to listen to you enough to know what your bus stop is. So can I give you just a little bit of what I've already done right now, and then we can continue?
Please do.
So, two things I've noticed. The word manipulation is important to you. And you want to talk about the negative impacts of manipulation and how they can be avoided. And that kind of language from my book is called Away From Language, how to get rid of a problem or avoid it or solve it. So I've heard two things. One, the value that you talk about is manipulation and how to avoid it. So I have switched my language from maybe talking about goal-oriented things to talk about manipulation and what can be done about it, how it works, how to prevent it, what you need to do to stop yourself from being manipulated, that kind of thing. So I've done that already. Yeah.
And I thought that was your idea. I thought you were insisting on manipulation.
Well, and that's normal because I just reflected it back. So the number of times that word was mentioned in our conversation has gone way up. Yeah.
So somebody please start counting them and we'll see where that gets us. Okay. So
absolutely. Yeah, totally. I think that's a great demonstration. Yeah.
You pay attention, you understand what the bus stop of the other person is, meaning the position, whatever in life, in that conversation, or the state of mind that person finds.
So I specifically pay attention, because this is my area of expertise, to the linguistic aspects. And I know you like language and linguistics. So I'm looking for verbal cues that tell me what your motivation triggers are, how you think, how you get motivated, how you make decisions. So one pair of those patterns I just mentioned was toward a goal or away from what you don't want, toward or away from. Another pair, and this comes back to your question about people who can't be manipulated or easily controlled. There's another pair of patterns. One is called internal, and that's someone who holds standards and values in their body and uses them as a test. So whenever they get information or see something or hear something, they judge it again based on what's important to them. That's internal. It's not a personality trait, it's a mode. So this is all about the language and behavior profile. It's not a personality profile. You don't always do the same thing. The other pattern is when people become more external. So they're more influenced by what's happening on the outside. If you have credibility, and if someone else is external to you, you should be careful, I think, to what you say, because you have a huge impact, right? You know, when people respect other people and they say, you should do this, and they go, oh, okay, and they do it. But this is also a mistake people make in interpersonal communication, right? In couples, the longer you've been together, the more internal people tend to become to the other partner. So if you say to your husband or your wife, I think you should do this, that's not very effective. That does not, we know that it doesn't work. Whereas if you use language designed for someone who likes to decide for themselves, and I call this the language of suggestion, or the language of invitation, where you say, I had an idea, I'd like to talk to you about it. What would you think if? That will go in better than we need to do this, or you need to do that, which just goes bang, 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 it doesn't get in, then you get a fight. So these patterns change depending on who you're with, or if you're at work or on holiday or something. They're contextual. And internal, external is a really important one to listen for in any kind of relationship. So that's another example of a pair of these motivation triggers. Yeah.
That's very interesting also because it's an art. So you have to be very attentive, and you have to invest a huge amount of energy, and to remember the things, and to know everything, and to be there, to be present in the conversation, which is the first step of a good communication. Just that, in this case, it might be used with for evil purposes. I just have one small question here, because you said that it's very important to listen to what people have to say. What about those who don't talk much, or who are very cautious, or who are very timid, very shy? So they don't know how to express themselves. And in not expressing themselves, they protect themselves from this knowledge that you can use your generic you against them. How do you deal with them?
Sometimes it's not even trying to protect themselves. There's shy people who are introverted. Many years ago, I worked on a youth development project in Canada, and I lived up north on what we used to call a Native Indian reservation. And, you know, I come from the city. I come from a Jewish culture. We're talking all the time. I think when you're Jewish, if you're not talking, it's only because you're dead. Otherwise, you're still talking when you sleep. And I showed up and was working on a project in a community where people don't talk all the time. You know, someone would invite you to have coffee in town, and you go there and there's 4 people around a table and no one says anything for 30 minutes. I thought I was going to die at the beginning. I just kept talking. But lots of people don't necessarily articulate everything that they want or everything that they need. And
which is a good thing.
Which is a good thing. And it takes time. You need to establish rapport with someone, a real rapport, so that they feel comfortable enough and they trust you to talk. And, you know, you said this can take an awful lot of effort and conscious effort to listen. It's true. It is a skill to do that, but it doesn't have to be so difficult. One of the things that we developed some technology over the years, and we have a piece of software that we developed. We have 2 US patents on this. It's called Libreta. And this Libreta automatically identifies in email what are these motivation triggers that are embedded in an email that you receive. So let's say you receive an email and you think, oh, I better think about how I answer, because there could be negative consequences that I want to avoid. You click the button and Libreta will analyze what are the patterns motivating the person at that moment when they wrote the email, and give you suggestions for what language to use. Now, this is not a miracle cure. It won't make miracles happen. You have to decide for yourself what you're going to say. Libreta only tells you what kind of language would this person like to hear, how you might want to say it. And then you can type in your answer, and Libreta will give you feedback. It evaluates your answer against the incoming email and gives you what we call a fit score. And if you get 50% or more, it's probably good to send. And the reason is exactly what you talked about. It takes time to learn these skills. You can, you know, some of the patterns people will go, oh, I like that one. I got that immediately. And they're immediately able to use it. Other ones take a bit more practice. And that's why we developed Libreta and another tool for people with husbands.
That's very interesting. So is Libreta, or are they both available somehow, or?
Yes, if you go to libreta.com, it's a subscription, and at the moment it's available in Outlook for Windows, but in a very few weeks, I hope by the fall, autumn, September 2022, it will be available in Microsoft 365, and soon after that, you'll be able to use your subscription in Google Chrome, which means you can analyze any text, any email, Facebook, Instagram, anything, if you open it in Chrome. So that's coming out very soon, but you can already get it for your work emails in Outlook. So,
which is good, but also kind of scary. And you said something very interesting about husbands and wives. But before that, I didn't get quite right. What was the answer about people who cannot be influenced? Are there such people, or it's just that you haven't found the right language or the right tools yet?
I suspect the second thing you said is more correct, because a lot of things have to be in place. So let's imagine you're dealing with someone who really is hard to influence or hard to manipulate, or whatever word you want to use. Often they don't trust people. Right. And so they're in the defensive mode. So they're already suspicious of everything. So there's no way to get in until you can find some way to build trust, rapport, and credibility. But they may be very open to someone else. Like you'll see in religious communities, very shall I say, orthodox or fundamental religious communities, they're very closed to outsiders, but very external to their leader, right? They do things their leader says and they follow their leader, but everyone else, they're impervious, like they have a big wall up. So it can be contextual. There are some people who got walls up everywhere in their life, and you can knock, but you cannot come in. You know that song, you can knock, but you can, I don't remember the tune, but so there are people that are like that. And on the other hand, they are missing some opportunities. This is like the ultra macho. I developed a psychological quiz. It's not a legitimate psychological test. I developed a quiz called the Macho Factor Quiz. And the highest level of macho, the definition is, and this is pretty tough, but it addresses those people. It says, you sabotage your own learning because you refuse to take in information from the outside. Right. And see, that's the problem for those people, is they're closed and their lives are likely to get smaller and smaller because they're not taking in anything. So they do exist. Absolutely.
So we can say that the most inflexible and rigid people on earth are the machos.
Yeah, that's my terminology. And you know what? Women can be just as macho as men. We all are macho from time to time, right? Yeah.
So there are macho women as well, which is kind of funny. Well, now you are an expert and a certified trainer in NLP. And we said that we are going to talk about this briefly before we get into it. What is NLP?
So NLP is short for neuro-linguistic programming. I would have preferred a different name, because when you say programming, it's like using the metaphor of a computer for people. So the metaphor is we all program ourselves or get programmed to do things really well and do other things poorly. And the neuro-linguistic part comes from, by paying attention to linguistics, nonverbals and verbals, you can get an idea of the strategies people use neurologically and physically to be excellent at some things, mediocre at some things, and poor at other things. So when you learn NLP, you are learning how you and how other people structure your reality for high performance or for low performance. And it means that you can actually model or learn from people who are really successful. And one of the things that attracted me to NLP, and I started learning NLP in 1983 when I was living in France, working for a French training company, a professional training company. We worked in speed reading and communication and negotiation. And it really attracted me because traditional psychology likes to delve into, why do you have problems? What's the root cause of your problem? And one of the revolutionary ways, and NLP was not the only field that did this, instead of investigating why, NLP went, well, what's your goal? And what's the easiest, best way to get to your goal? Well, and you only need to solve the problems that come up between where you are and where your goal is. Whereas if you get distracted by all of the causes, which are many and multiple, because we all have lived rich and complicated lives, it doesn't help move you forward to where you want to be. So NLP is about listening to someone and saying, okay, all right, well, what do you want with regards to that? And how can we help you get there? So that was one of the things that really attracted me to this field. Yeah.
It's very interesting. I think interesting has become the new manipulation word. I mean, I've used manipulation before, and now I'm using interesting. And I'm thinking, if you place that seed into my mind somehow, if you NLP'd me, no, I'm joking. Can one NLP herself? Can you just
thank goodness. Yes.
Program yourself through words? You say it to yourself?
Yes.
How?
So one of the basic NLP techniques, which is not an NLP development, it's just noticing what happens in the world, is the concept, Pavlov talked about stimulus response. Well, in NLP, we call it anchoring. If you go to a place where you had a happy event, all you have to do is go to that place in your mind and you feel happy. If you think about a place where you had a negative event, all you have to do is even think about that place and you feel negative.
Mhm.
So NLP uses associations. You can put them on your fingers. Like I've got anchors all over. So this one right here is anchoring a positive emotional state. So I actually, and there's an NLP technique where you build a positive emotional state and then you associate it with a gesture. That's there. This one is for interviews and speaking. So this is speaker Shelley. This is, excuse me, my voice is a little.
God bless you.
This one here is for being centered and grounded and goal focused. This one here is for meditation. It helps me go to sleep. So I've got a bunch of anchors to help me avoid the problems I know I've had and do have, and get into the physical, emotional state that I want to have at a given time. That's one of the techniques that in NLP you can use on yourself.
Well, now I understand better this, and I understand better why Italians speak like this.
So maybe I get it. Yeah.
NLP themselves.
Well, I hear Romanian is very much like Italian. Do people
Yes,
use this
gesture a lot, but I don't think that this has anything to do with words. It's more like we're trying to anchor ourselves into the reality, and we're just grabbing it.
Well, right. And so look what you just did here. You grab something. So even in your mind, your physical actions affect how you think about something. Like some people grab onto ideas, whereas other people can contemplate them or, you know, entertain ideas. Like if somebody said, well, I entertain that idea, you know, they're thinking about it in a whole different way than somebody who said, well, I can grab onto that and use that. Right? You can actually see it from their gestures and the words they choose.
Well, that's the physicality of words. But as we know, the nonverbal communication is queen, or so they say. The theory is that we communicate more through nonverbal gestures than
I have to stop you there, because this has been a misquote for many years. This quote is based on Albert Moravian's study. And Albert Moravian said that 7% of people who are communicating in a way that is non-congruent will believe the words over the gestures. So for example, imagine I'm talking to you and I said to you, I'm really happy. Well, 7% of the population doesn't notice body language and voice tone. They just notice words. So 7% of the population thinks when you say, I'm really happy, they think you're happy. Whereas everybody else is listening or looking at what you're saying and is not influenced by that. So you could say more accurately that nonverbal language is really only 7% of communication. And that's a more accurate interpretation than what has been commonly interpreted from that one study. Yeah.
Okay, so words do matter.
They do matter a lot. Like if I spoke to you in Spanish or French, which and if you don't speak it, you wouldn't understand what I'm saying.
I do. But you can use Chinese. That would be but still, the tone of voice would give me some information about what you're trying to convey, or at least about how we stand in the discussion. Now, NLP is a practice which has been widely debated in society, in politics, on TV, in fake news. It comes back all the time because it's
used. So are you thinking NLP and fake news have been linked?
I think so, yeah. Because
because I have not heard that. Yeah.
So the core would be manipulation, and I was about to say that it can be used for evil purposes or for good purposes, and it's sad that the manipulators in politics and fake news is based on this, focused on how to do evil things through words and through programming, as you said, other people. For instance, we are going to take this example, the Ukrainian war, because it's something we are dealing with. We've been dealing with for many months now, and it's really, really sad to be watching how very bad events are portrayed sometimes in order to create fake news. That's my idea when I said that they have been linked. So my question is, does NLP have limits? Can it be used for good purposes and evil purposes with the same results? Are there any things that NLP cannot achieve?
I'm a little surprised that you linked NLP with fake news. I suspect that but to your credit, I think there are people who use NLP techniques to enhance what they do in mass manipulation. Because remember, fake news is not about interpersonal communication, it's mass communication, which is a different kind of communication than one-on-one. In one-on-one, you and I respond to each other. In one-to-many, in broadcasting and trying to influence masses of people, you need to use different techniques because you're not making fine-tuned adjustments when we listen to each other that we automatically make, and those of us who are more skilled do a bit more professionally. Fake news and NLP, and is there limits? I don't believe that NLP is a miracle cure. I think it's a set of techniques and tools and strategies, and that it can be used any way you want. It can be used to manipulate people. Yeah, it can be used to enhance relationships and make positive things happen. It's a set of tools that are powerful, and so it can be used that. But I don't think it's a miracle cure. I think if NLP were a miracle cure, I would have no problems. But I can't say that. So I think it's not the be all and end all. I'm very glad I learned NLP. It helps me in all my relationships. It helps me understand manipulations that are done on a mass level. And I've mentioned some of these in my book. Like if you're trying to change behavior or change attitudes, it's helpful to understand what's going on. And we know in the American election in 2016, to go back to that, we know that they used Facebook posts and analyzed them based on the big 5 personality traits to influence people to vote for Donald Trump. We know that the things that the Russian population hear from their news media are completely different than how Ukrainians perceive this sudden invasion of their territory that, that they weren't prepared for because they've been living in a semi-war situation with Russia since 2014 and before that. So you can hear embedded in what I'm saying is I don't agree with the Russian propaganda at all. I mean, even in a relatively peaceful place like Canada, I was on a road trip this weekend and saw the convoy, the so-called Freedom Convoy, who are still going to Ottawa, our capital province, with their upside down Canadian flags. I even saw a Russian flag to protest against everything and anything. And this is a movement that's all about against. It's very hard to know what they're for because they only ever talk about what they don't like. I mean, and they're very hard to control, except when they're with regards to their own leaders who they believe everything they say. So they're very external, to use my terminology, to their leadership and their community, but very internal. You can't tell me what to think. I know what I'm doing to everyone else. So you can see how contextual it is. So if Vladimir Putin has a credibility with his population, they believe everything he says, right? And now there's documentaries out that show how he came to power. What were the steps he did to get to power? There's documentaries out on Marine Le Pen in France. What has been the route? How has she changed the party, even the name of the National Front in France, so that she became more acceptable to a larger number of people? So politicians are using these techniques all the time. I don't know if that answered your question, Nadine.
Well, it did, yes. And it's actually connected to the main topic of our conversation, which is manipulation. And I just wanted to ask you, is manipulation always a bad thing? And from what you say, I understand that in order to be a good manipulator, you have to be a very good communicator or a very good listener. But I don't think you can be a good communicator if you're not a good listener anyway. So when we say manipulation, the connotation is always negative. It's like something evil. You're trying to do something for your own interest. But can it be good sometimes?
Well,
have benefits?
This is a personal example. I remember as a child, my mother always bringing us up to be, you have to be honest, you have to tell the truth.
Mhm.
And that was really, really important. And then many, many years later, when my father was dying of cancer, she and my father lied to my father's mother about his physical state. They didn't tell her until the very end that he was going to die. And I confronted my mother all my life. You told me that the truth was more important than anything. And my mother was upset by me confronting her, but she said, we didn't think that your grandmother, who lives in England, would take it very well if she went through the whole time knowing that her only child was about to die or going to die at some point. So we chose to tell her something that made it easier for her to deal with the whole situation and not have to suffer so much. So she was trying to tell me that this was a good manipulation. And I realized from that, it's kind of hard to have a black or white. It's either this or it's that. And I think if we zoom out and look at the big picture, you go, well, what am I trying to accomplish with this person and what do they need? And, sometimes it's not black and white. And it reminds me, there's been some research about the difference between men and women on a number of different words. And this one that comes up is a lie. What is the definition for the men in the study and the women in the study? Because it can't be all men and all women, but it was a very interesting study. Is that the definition that women gave to lying was, lying is when you say something that's not true. Punt. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And men, their definition was a little different. You can see where some of the problems come. Lying for men is saying something that's not true and it's harmful.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a lie if it's not harmful.
Well, it's very debatable what's harmful for them or for women in their lives. But yes, well,
you can see how that causes conflictual communication.
Yeah, that's just an excuse, in my opinion. But I suppose in your example, which is a very nice one because it relates to that personal communication and that personal relationship that is to be found in a family mostly. White lies are not manipulation, I suppose. I mean, your parents were not.
That's what they think. Yeah. It's just, you hear people say this, don't you, Nadine? It's just a white lie.
Yeah. Well, it depends
how is the person receiving this, right? Yeah.
It depends how gray the white lie is or how black eventually. Well, now coming back to NLP, which is quite a science if we are to think about it this way, because it involves technique, it involves practice, it involves a lot of research and a lot of thinking and coordination behind this. How does the brain work in terms of language so that it can be influenced through words? And what is it so powerful with words, and especially with certain words? Do they trigger emotions or, as you said, experiences? Or is it like the memory lane, which is paved with some words that, and if somebody else could see that pavement, they would have access to our personality and therefore we would be more easily manipulated by them.
Mm-hmm. So I have to say right up front, I am not a neuroscientist. I have not done the research. I don't think because I look things up on the internet that I'm actually doing research. But what is being talked about more and more is what parts of the brain respond to what stimuli. So anybody can look this up. And it turns out that we have different parts of our brain that respond to different kinds of patterns. And this is why I was so delighted. My first version of Words That Change Minds was written in 1995. And the most recent version came out a couple years ago. And what has happened since then, there has been so much research on what goes on in our brains. So for example, one of the things I talked about and have talked about for a long time is our different patterns that trigger different things. Well, now they have brain research that says, well, this is exactly where that happens. So I've quoted that in my book. Give you an example of the thing that you talked about. What are there words that can be used that manipulate us? So one of the things I talk about in a book is our values and our criteria. Each person has a set of words or phrases that they use to talk about things they love and are important to them in different contexts, or things they hate and they don't want. Well, those words, those criteria, when they hear them, when they read them, when they see them, create an emotional, physical response. Now, don't believe me, just think about how everyone in your family, and I invite all of the people watching, think about how everyone in your family knows if they say this, you will explode. Well, how is that possible? Well, they touched a negative hot button and all they had to do was say it. And those of us who have kids notice that our children all day long push those buttons for each other. So that's an example of a physical, emotional, neurological response to words. It could also be actions and behaviors, but we have over time programmed or been programmed for these responses. And so if you understand someone's negative hot buttons and their positive hot buttons, you have more of an impact. You could use it to manipulate, or you could use it to help and enhance.
Mm-hmm. Now, the hard thing is to identify those words. And for someone you don't know very well, or for someone who is very private or who doesn't talk much, that's almost impossible. So maybe they don't know those words themselves. Well, you said something which we didn't talk much about, and it was very important, about husbands and wives.
Ooh.
And I know you have a measurement tool that you devised.
So having been married more than once,
Mm-hmm.
It occurred to me that it would be helpful if partners understood the language and behavior motivation triggers that I talk about in Words That Change Minds.
Mm-hmm.
So I developed a smartphone tool called Husband Motivator.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go to husbandmotivator.com, it'll give you the link for your iPhone or your Android device to download the free app. And this is actually designed to help you motivate or influence your husband. Okay. And yes, you could use it on wives. We developed it for women and men who have husbands, because those are the people who are more interested statistically in self-help products. So there you go. But you can use it to think about your boss or your parents or your children. We just designed it for Husband Motivator. So you put in your husband's name, your pet name, the name you call your husband when you are having a nice time with him. And then you choose a context, because we know all these patterns are contextual. You know, you're motivated differently when you're thinking about work than when you're thinking about vacation or family. So you put in a context and subcontext, and then the app asks you a few questions about your husband. Now, the secret is you can have as many husbands as you like in the app. So you can you save everything. It'll send you an email, and it teaches you a formula that I developed called the 4-step motivation method. And each of those will be customized to the motivation triggers that your husband has. So you answer the questions. It shows you what motivation triggers your husband has and gives you the 4-step motivating method so that you can have more influence. So I'd be very interested if people tried it out, and then email me, let me know what you think of it, because I'm very curious to see what you think.
So basically, it gives you back the script, which you can use with specific words in order to trigger a certain motivation for a certain context or situation you want to improve, let's say, with your husband.
Yeah. So I have to tell you something just very quickly about the development of this app. After I developed this app, I was invited to give a keynote speech at the German Speakers Association. So these were people from Switzerland, Austria, and Germany. And I did a presentation. And at the end of this, I presented my app, because it was just coming out and I wanted to promote it. And then at the end of the day, they had a speaker who makes jokes about all the previous speakers come on. And this is a guy from Chicago. He's a crusty old guy. He kind of looks like he's drunk. And he gets up there and he says, and then then there's that Shelle Rose Charvet person who thinks she can motivate her husband. Well, doesn't she know that if you want to motivate your husband, it's either sex or food. So if you're not going to have sex with them, make them a sandwich. You don't need an app for that. So there's 400 people killing themselves laughing. I'm at the back of the room crying because I spent a lot of money developing this app and laughing at the same time, thinking, oh, he's right. Why did I do this? And then it was a very creative period in my life. And so 3 days later, I came up with the description for the app. And it says, have you tried using sex and food and your husband still won't do what you want? Have we got the app for you? So the app is supposed to be playful and is supposed to help you enhance communication. Yeah.
Well, actually, you could get a partnership with Kama Sutra or with a recipe book, a cookbook, and
there you go. Yeah,
all the problems together.
So if the app doesn't work, you can go back to sex and food. There you go.
Yes, well, that's funny. Yeah, because you can link all of these things together. But the most important thing is for it to work. And let's take just a quick example which comes to my mind. I suppose most women would like to influence their husbands when they have a conflict, when they have a fight. So if you type in fight in the husband motivator and a few things about your husband, let's say your husband is quick-tempered, or I'm not talking about a personal example here because I'm not married anymore. So let's say this is the situation. What will you get? So what kind of text, what to say during a fight to calm the conflict, or what kind of message, just for the audience to know what to expect, because as you said, this is not the magic. It's not like you say
it's not the magic bullet, but it'll give you an idea of a process to think about how you communicate. So the 4-step motivating method, it is very different than how people just normally communicate. When people normally communicate, they look at the other person, they tell them what they're thinking. The 4-step, they just go, and there's no introduction, right? And they usually, as I said before, talk the way they want to be talked to, as opposed to how the other person wants to be talked to. The 4-step motivation method doesn't start with what, it starts with why. And why am I going to tell you this? And then, but it matches your husband's pattern. Is it to get rid of a problem or address a problem or go towards a goal? So towards or away from, that's why. And it's based on what pattern your husband has in that context. The second step of the 4-step motivation method is what? What do you want to tell a person? And there again, it's based on the words that change minds patterns. Are you talking to someone who's in internal mode? They decide what they want and what they don't want, or someone who's more external? And to whom are they external? So the language is adjusted for that. The third step in the 4-step motivation method is how. Does the person want to consider possibilities and options, or would they rather think in steps? Each person's different. It's customized to them. And the very last step in the 4-step motivation method is appreciation. We spend very little time telling the other person how much we love them, how much we appreciate them, and what we like about them. So the 4 steps are, why am I telling you this? What am I telling you? How do we want to deal with this? And how I appreciate you. And there's examples in the app of language that you can use. And it may be a bit complicated for some people. That's why there's an option to email it to yourself.
And maybe memorize it and just render it.
Yeah, but even think about it. If you just know how, why, what, how, and appreciation, even just knowing that, when you communicate with someone that you care about, who you may be having a conflict with, your communication's already automatically going to get better, right?
Yeah, I hope the other person would do the same, or would look.
And that increases the chances that the other person is saying, half the time we say, well, why can't they come to my bus stop, right? But the easiest way to get someone to come to your bus stop is to go to theirs first, right?
Okay, that's a good thing to know, and I'm going to see what that gives, even if there's no husband. But communication, as you said, is between a lot of people, and we didn't even talk about the work environment, but maybe next time because we're running out of time. But I have one last question, which is kind of the gist of it. It's like it's summing up what you said, because NLP is important because it makes us more aware of what we say and of how we say it, which is maybe even more important than what we say. What are 3 or let's say 5 principles of NLP that we have to be aware of when we talk or before we talk or when we are trying to influence someone in a positive or maybe sometimes even in a negative way? Let's hope not for doing evil.
So, okay, so you're going to get the Shelle Rose Charvet version of this.
Yes.
So number 1, if you actually want to have, let's call it an impact on someone else, I need to establish rapport, right? Yeah. I need to establish credibility, right? Just because you like me doesn't mean you're going to believe anything I say. So that would be 1, rapport, credibility. And if you have an audience that are skeptical, do credibility before rapport. They need to know that it's possible for them to respect you and like you, depends on who you're talking to. The second step is to be in a resourceful state. It's very frustrating that when someone is really negative and they're stuck in a hole, to help them because they're deep down in the hole. And we have this stupid expression in English, dig your way out of a hole. But when you think about it, if you're in a hole and you dig, you're not getting out of the hole, right? You're making the hole bigger. So if you can help the person access a resourceful state where they feel intelligent and they feel capable, as opposed to feeling that all of the problems in the world are bigger than they are and they're not capable of anything, then that's a really good important point. So help people be resourceful. Point 3, what's your goal? What is the whole purpose for this conversation, this intervention, or whatever? So if you don't have a purpose, it's hard to know how to do it. So then after that is how will you converse, or how will you converse, or how will you talk with the person, or what will you do? Well, it's based on knowing what the goal is. So you've got rapport, you have credibility, the person's in a resourceful state, you know the goal, and now it's much easier to know how to do what you're going to do. And then the last thing that I think is a really important point in NLP is NLP, when you're using NLP, strives to be ecological. And ecology, a definition that I love of ecology, is the study of consequences. So if you have an impact in one part of your life, it may impact another part of your life. So if you take on a big work assignment, it may impact your family. Whatever you touch has consequences in other contexts. So NLP strives to look at consequences and take them into actions. It's another reason that I like the system that's inside in NLP. And one last thing, the NLP definition that wasn't invented by NLP of communication is what the other person understood. They can't read your mind. They only understand what they understand. So you know what is communicated by the response you get back. If you said something, the other person got angry, they understood a provocation. If you said something and they were happy, they understood something that was complimentary. So communication is, so those are some of the basic principles of NLP that I think are healthy and good for all of us to use to avoid manipulating. Yeah.
But about this last part, which is quite intriguing. So sometimes when the other person doesn't understand what you wanted to say, it's not your fault, or it doesn't pertain to you since you expressed your message very clearly, or is it?
What it means is, did you successfully get your message across to this person? And their response tells you that. So you do have the responsibility to change how you are saying something so they get it, right? What if it actually makes communication easier? If everybody's just supposed to understand you, but they don't, and it's their fault, there's nothing you can do. But if you go, oh, I see, that didn't go the way I wanted it to. Hey, wait a second. I'm going to make another try at it. Now, I get frustrated when my husband doesn't understand everything in the way I meant. Then I have to calm down. Okay, think about it. That's not how he thinks about things, right? We all have room to move, room to improve in this.
What if you did convey the message in the best possible way and still they don't understand it? What do you do? So, or you get the same reaction, like that person becomes angry or frustrated.
So I believe that there's another issue happening. One is either you think you're perfect and you're not, or two, something else is going on in the relationship. So if you think you've tried your best and you've done it the best way and the other person's not getting it, that's not the problem. The problem is in your rapport and conflict. And now it's time to look at that. Right? There's a reason why that happens, right? Doesn't that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does make perfect sense, because it's not everything about words. I mean, let's not forget that words are very, very important, but they're not everything.
That's right. There's a whole relationship aspect that goes on.
Yes, it's just that you need words to build a relationship, but sometimes you need more than words to maintain it. And you definitely can use words to destroy it. Well, we see that a lot. Well, so words that change minds and behaviors, I suppose, and also lives. Because if we reprogram, this is a word which is very much used in NLP, our internal dialogue, our internal monologue, and the way we communicate with others, then our lives can improve. And hopefully the lives of the people around us. Thank you so much, Shelle Rose Charvet, and it's been quite fun. It's been quite fun and quite an honor, I have to say, to talk to you about such important matters, because I feel like words have become even more important, and we have to be even more cautious when we use them. And you are making us aware of it. Thank you so much. And I hope you can come to Bucharest and do such things here in front of us, like perform some NLP or some examples from your book for us to understand what that.
I would love to. I think Romania is a wonderful country. I've visited more than once. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. So you're welcome anytime you want to come and visit us as well. Thank you so much, and see you soon, I hope.
Thank you.
Bye.